Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And biggest news for EVE Talk, of course, is that CCP is taking away the couch because they are retiring the Captain's Quarter in the August release. So somewhere next month we can expect EVE Talk to change a little bit in appearance. I think at first I'll just do it from the regular hangar bay then. That'll work as well, but I'll have to basically find a little bit of a way to add a small intro into EVE Talk. Other than that, Twitch support is going as well, and basically what I'm seeing here is that CCP is trying to trim off some of the fat so that they can put all their effort into improving EVE Online itself. And personally, of course, it's a little bit annoying in the sense that especially for people that have been buying apparel for their characters like hats and you also got with the collector's edition, like the special arm and things like that. It's a little bit unfortunate, but I have to be honest as well, outside of EVE Talk, I never used the Captain's Quarters, so I think that the data does show that so few people use it, that it can be taken out. So maybe at some point they'll be able to do something more with our characters, like maybe going to sleeper sites and things like that, you know. Hopefully CCP Torfi France can get that vision that he has talked about a little bit at FanFest a few times through as well. But at the moment, of course, all development is set on like the structures, spaceships, rebalancing things, and hopefully also trying to get some conflict back into nullsec. Anyways, let's move on to the market. That's why we are here. As always, we are going to start with plex, and that is going to be at 155. There we go. And plex are going back up. 3.1 million is now for a plex. So we have basically already crossed the previous peak at 305 here on the chart. We're back up 309. And yeah, it's just a continuous increase in price for plex. So even sales and things like that. Oh, and I should also take out the filter. So those were cheetah prices. 3,070,000 in perimeter and Morrissey. Quantities, that's interesting, 1120, so this is probably one player that is trying to sell quite a few plex, but in different orders. Don't really understand why you're doing that. Maybe to try and slow down the possible descent of the price, but at the moment not much to worry about. Plex is going back up substantially to almost 3.1 million on average. Buyers are above 3 million as well. Quite expensive for plex, and what I was saying is that it shows that while CCP is having a hard time controlling this, they can try to do some plex sales and have some bumps on this increase in price, but 3 million is still so easy to get to that I think a lot of players that don't necessarily watch the market all that much do just go in and empty their wallets, dump a lot of that into plexes, and as a result, yeah, you get this this increased demand because of the increased accessibility, and that's not going away anytime soon because 3 million apparently is still very affordable as well, although that is 1.5 billion and up for an old 30-day plex. Moving on then to the multiple pilot training certificate, let's take a look at that. Should be going back up after the massive sale that those have known, and it is to 1.3 billion on the chart, 1.35 billion for the sellers, 1.23 billion for the buyers. So obviously that is going to normalize. I would not be surprised. This should go to 1.5 billion, of course, under pressure of plex, unless something happens like another sale. But what is interesting, of course, is that CCP still does do sales on these multiple pilot training certificates, so they don't plan to phase this out of the game. Personally, I would have thought maybe they would do that because you can still grab 500 plex and have the exact same result, but that makes for a tiny market. It's really not very big here. Sales are normalizing to less than 100 a day at the moment, and it does provide us basically a bit of a barometer for knowing what 30 days of plex are going to cost us once, of course, this reverts and recovers from that massive sale, increase in volumes, decrease in price, and we're in the process of doing that. So hopefully this barometer comes into normal territory pretty soon. Then we can start to look for the correlation between Plex prices, the old Plex prices, and the training certificates. Moving on to the large scale injectors, those should go back up in price, but interestingly enough, they have not crossed the old high of early June here at 760 million, currently being sold for 753 million, and we have to go down a decent amount to 773 in JITA, and the buyers are at 740 million for a large scale injector. Quite pricey, heading towards that 1 billion for a skill injector. I should have checked the skill extractor first. That chart is quite a bit closer to Plex, of course. We can see here a couple of median daily prices above the median daily price of the previous peak, and a skill extractor is costing 346 million ISK. The buyers are at 340. So 346 million for a skill extractor and 753 million for a skill injector. You can basically from that margin decide on the value, the demand for skill points, and at the moment basically seeing that this is a little bit flatter than the previous high, whereas the skill extractor prices have jumped up above that. I would say that this is an indication of a slight slowdown, a very slight slowdown in demand for extra skill points in the large skill injectors. Basically they can't command a higher margin, and if skill point demand would all of a sudden shoot up, for instance, and let's say the skill extractor prices were flat, you would expect this chart to have more momentum upwards than the skill extractor chart, which at the moment it's the exact opposite by only a tiny margin. Keep that in mind though. Moving on to the small skill injector, those are taking off quite a bit more quickly here. The chart is of course a bit weirder because it's a newer item, but you are paying 157 million ISK for a small skill injector, and 150 million is what the buyers are asking, or willing to pay I should say, for small skill injectors. So it's quite interesting as large scale injectors become more and more pricey. We may see more and more interest in the small scale injectors, so I would say that we would then start to see volumes of these go up. It's of course still a little bit early to say if that's going to happen, or if people basically want a large scale injectors because at least you get a decent pool of skill points out of this one, and you can give yourself at least somewhat of a boost, especially on a newer character. So yeah, we'll see. Of course, at the moment Plex back on the upswing despite the fact that it's summer. I was hoping that this would be the start of at least a bit of a flattening and a maybe slight pullback for the summer. It's just not happening, and at the moment, yeah, we should maybe look at selling some of the Plexes once we reach a peak. The problem is of course that if this momentum keeps up and can manage to push through to the December expansion, we'll be going for, in my opinion, stratospheric prices, and we may have to wait for after the December expansion to see an actual pullback. And basically that would mean that the lower price of Plex would create so much demand, so much accessibility for it, that it never gets a chance to breathe a little bit, a bit of a pullback, and that it still needs to adapt to that new situation, to that new demand, that you can get Plex for as low as 3 million ISK. And as a result, that is, I think, starting to form because of this latest upswing that is still pretty sharp, has some momentum behind it. I think that's definitely in the cards, that up until the December expansion we'll still have mostly upwards pressure, maybe some periods of a bit of a pullback or sideways movement, but no real pullback in the price of Plex. It would be unfortunate because I would like to have a chance to invest at least a few billion in Plexes before the December expansion, but I think I'm not alone, and with, as I've been saying here, the fresh supply due to the new accessibility, it may just never materialize, and we may get like a peak up to 4 million ISK for the December expansion, after which I think that the new Plex have been out long enough that will then have somewhat more normal market forces be able to take over there. So that's it for the Plex category. Let's move on to some minerals, and that means that we take this filter out and we are doing that at 950. Roger that. Let's start as always with titanium, that is currently selling at around 5.4 ISK. The bars are at 523, so a little bit of a hesitation here, but it must be said after a nice increase in price over a little bit over a month, maybe 1.5 months, from 4.5 to almost 5.5 ISK. That's definitely a nice increase in price, nice increase in efficiency for people mining titanium, but high-sec minerals, high-sec ores in general. I think this is very good news, and a bit of a pause here actually will make sense. The one thing that we should notice, I think, is also the much lower volumes here with that increase in price. So this could indicate lesser supply because of lower activity in the game in general. I think that's definitely possible, but it's good to see prices holding strong above 5 ISK. Meaning that us high-sec miners have something to look forward to when it comes to selling some of our ores. Next up, we've got pyrite on the upswing a little bit, 5-day moving average crossing 20-day moving average, but it's still very timid and prices well above 6 ISK. Again, here at the tail end, I am seeing slightly lower volumes as well, and pyrite is selling for 591. The buyers are at 558, so still well below 6 ISK. I would like to see a push to go up between 6 and 7 to try and do something similar to what titanium has been doing, but that apparently is a bit tougher to do. Maybe there are more massive volumes of pyrite available, still slugging around, keeping the price from really taking off, because you can see that an increase was attempted towards 6.57 ISK here, but was basically aborted by a massive volume dump. And so this, we could see this a couple more times before we actually manage to get a sustainable price above 6 ISK. But I think it's in the cards, especially on the lower volumes, lower activity. If people don't keep stocking up, which they're probably not doing at the moment, it might actually happen. Next up, we've got Mixalon, that is still slowly giving back ground, but is trying to hold on above 65 ISK. You can see that on a couple days we reached that on average, but it's been defended by the market. And so Mixalon is selling for 67.74 and the buyers are at 65.76. Hopefully we don't have to give away too much ground, because this is of course the one mineral that, even historically speaking, is still at a pretty damn good price. Above 70 is a great price, 65 is still a really good price for Mixalon, and of course it's still the same story. If you are mining in high-sec and you have the opportunity, focus on Mixalon sources before all others, because this will get you the most ISK per hour. Moving on to Isogen, flat and unfortunately still 5-day moving average below 20-day moving average. At the last few days we are trying to get up there a little bit, trying to go above 50 ISK. Again, lower volumes are pretty noticeable here, so this is the same pattern as with pyrite, an increase in price, massive volumes causing the price to shut down, and here we're basically flat at the tail end. Sellers just below 50 ISK, buyers are at 47.67, so hopefully here again on the lower activity, lower supply, but if there are more Nosec preparations, hopefully a war comes, then we might actually see Isogen make a bit of a comeback. So that would be the dream scenario. Next up, Noxium, again very similar chart, tries to break out to 400. Not as much of a massive volume dump, but you can again see here in the last few weeks, last 10 days or so, that volumes are down and the prices are basically stabilizing just above 350 here. 358 for the sellers, 343 for the buyers of Noxium. So the story is stabilization here. Our hopes are that on this dump here, on pyrite here as well, and for Isogen too, that a lot of the investors that have these massive volumes have actually pulled the trigger on this one dump here, on this one increase in price, so that we'll have a chance next time to sustain higher prices. Moving on to Nosec minerals, here is the Zydrine chart. Oh yeah, I don't have to write down a timestamp for that. So Zydrine climbing out of the hole a little bit, heading towards 1100 ISK, quite interesting. 1090 ISK for the sellers, 1032 ISK almost for the buyers, and we can see a slight uptrend here, So I think that basically the nerfs to the Rorcal are starting to show their effect on the market. This is a little bit delayed, but that is normal that it's delayed because of course you know, these markets have some momentum. People have volumes that they were still mining at the old yields that they had yet to bring to the market. All of that is pretty normal, and so in general it does start to look like the nerfs to the Rorcal, the changes to the anomalies, so that they respawn a bit more slowly, are starting to have their effect on the mineral market, and that means slightly higher prices. First of all, of course, in these Nelsec minerals, here is Megasite. We can see a bit of an upswing, although in general that is still flat. We have broken out above 1250, I think. Sellers 1257, buyers 1180. Wide margin because of the faster increase in price here, but yeah, it is to be expected that some of the Nelsec minerals would be the ones that would have more swings in it, because of course we are dependent on imports into Chita of Zydrine. It's not like you can mine that somewhere in HiSec and bring that to the market from nearby. Nope. Zydrine is needs to be pulled in from Nelsec, and as a result, of course, if Nelsec mining has slowed down, at some point you're going to get lower supply, higher prices. That is all pretty normal, so keep that in mind. Again, buying for less than 1000 ISK on Zydrine is generally speaking a really good price, and so if you plan to use some of it somewhere, then that is the price to look out for. At the moment you can still buy very close to 1000 ISK, so these buy orders are not that bad, but we can clearly see that there is a slight increase in price in the works for these Nelsec minerals. Let's see if that translates for more fights. Unfortunately not. That one is going back in price to 9000 ISK. Yeah, 9016 for the first seller, but 9100 is a bit more realistic. I think this order will be picked up decently quickly. Buyers 8717, so buyers below 9000 ISK. I would say if you look at this entire chart here, and if you have any knowledge of Nelsec wars happening where some Tech 2 ships might get blown up, then this could be pretty interesting looking for another investment, right? If you can pick up some more fight for 8800, then even a sell opportunity at 10,000, which is definitely possible, is okay, not great, but okay. And if something big were to happen and we shoot up 11-12k, then of course you have a really good investment right there. So we can clearly see that we're again starting to play with those lower reaches of prices below 9000 ISK, which is where usually the markets tend to trigger to, you know, that's definitely low enough for more fight. We're going to start to stock up on some of that and do some investments ourselves. So yeah, keep that in mind. Prices are dropping for less than 9000 ISK for more fight on the buyer market. And that's it for minerals. We are moving on to some PI at 18 minutes. All right. So you can see from Eve Talk here, for 95% of the content, don't really need captain's quarters. I think we'll be all right doing this from the hangar bay. So I think at first, basically what I'm going to do is do it like that. And if there needs to be other changes, we'll look at it depending on how it goes after captain's quarters have been scrapped. But you know, this is Eve Talk, and I can still do the exact same thing from the ship hangar, of course. So no worries there. Eve Talk can keep going even without the captain's quarters. So moving on to PI, here are construction blocks, 12,240 ISK for the sellers, 11,600 for the buyers. You can see here basically flat with a slight downtrend at the tail end here, and on average, I would say maybe a bit, no, actually I would put this above this part of the chart, and I would actually say that this is pretty much an average normal price for construction blocks. So that normalization is still in the works for consumer electronics, but it's definitely happening. After triple peak, April, May and June, we peaked to 17,500 ISK. Consumer electronics are currently selling for 14,000 ISK. Buyers are at 13,800, so still pretty strong demand, well above average prices, but you can see that the momentum here will maybe start to drag us down to the average prices. 12,500, a bit below that even, is definitely possible for consumer electronics on average. So keep that in mind here. There's quite a momentum down, but there is still strong demand as well. This is a pretty narrow margin of less than 200 disk, no, a bit more than 200 disk on consumer electronics, so there is still pretty strong demand as well. But to me it is looking with 81,000 here, 80,000 here, well 99,000 here as well. Supply is definitely winning out at the moment, but that could still be because of those peak prices. My expectation, as I've said, is that we will though settle at the average prices at least. Coolants next, meandering around 12,000 ISK range, so this is pretty normal. Last few weeks went up a little bit towards 13k, which is above average, and the market responds by bringing that back down a little bit, clearly shown on the 5-day moving average. And we are at 12,009, let's say 13,000 for the sellers, 12,100 for the buyers. So it's pretty much the buyers that are on the average, and the coolant sellers are a couple hundred ISK above average, but will probably drop back down after this. Enriched uranium here actually breaking out a little bit back towards 17,500 ISK. So if it's not happening like with consumer electronics, then it keeps making those comeback swings. That's quite interesting. Enriched uranium selling for 17,800 ISK, definitely one of the PI products this week that you can bring to the market and try to sell right away. 16,900 for the buyers, very good prices and quite a bit above average. This is used in fuels, could have a bit of an impact on fuel prices, but coolants are keeping that in check a little bit. Next up, we've got the integrity response drone. So last week we had this little jump up, well, decent jump up on investments, and it's seemingly difficult for it to actually pull back to the 2.5 million range. Currently, integrity response drone is still selling for 2.8 million, buyers are at 2.6 million. So we'll need some time to digest that massive buy that happened last week. Mechanical parts next. Again went up in the last last 2 weeks or so, but in the last few days we are basically responding with a little bit of a pullback here. So currently selling for 11,500 ISK, first order coming in. Most of them are still at 12,000 ISK, but you can here see that pressure starting to mount to go back to average prices. Buyers 11,400, that's around the average. Oxygen next. This might look like a nice breakout, and if we reach 500 ISK, it is a nice breakout. I'm not seeing the volumes for that to happen, so yeah, actually it did happen. Okay, I was wrong on that. Interesting. I would have thought we'd need volumes way above the average, like towards 10 million units, but nope. Sellers are at 520 ISK, which is nicely above average. Buyers are at 481 ISK, and so here this price below 400 at 370 was apparently a nice little buy opportunity for oxygen. Completely unexpected in my book, and I think by next week you will see that this opportunity will have been flooded with new supply, because it's really easy to make oxygen. But at the moment you also have a nice little sell opportunity for your oxygen stocks that are currently selling at 520 ISK, well above average all of a sudden. Quite surprising to see that there is this amount of volatility in the oxygen market. I would not have expected that in a processed PI material. So very, very interesting, this one. Robotics next, trying to continue its downtrend, but we do see a massive volume spike from yesterday. Currently selling for 107,000 ISK, buyers 99,850. So a little bit below 100,000 ISK is what I would put as the average price for robotics. We're still a little bit above that, but we are clearly normalizing at this price range as well. And with the difference, you know, mechanical parts 12,000, 11,000 ISK, robotics 100,000 ISK, you do have inflation to keep in mind. So it is definitely possible that the new average price for robotics is something like 100 to 105,000 ISK because of inflation that's been happening since well, let's say last year or something like that. That's definitely possible. So keep in mind, this could be the new normal for robotics, the new average prices for robotics, but you can also see since March that there has been this downward pressure. Interestingly enough, massive volume spike yesterday, no real impact on the price to be seen here. Moving on to rocket fuel, that does become really interesting to buy here, to be honest, going down to less than 10,000 ISK. Sellers are at 10,250, buyers are at 9,800 ISK. And if you look at the entire chart here, this is well below average, clearly a 1-year low price point. And I think I've tried a couple of trades and one of them is rocket fuels. I think I've definitely bought them, just haven't sold them yet. This chart looks extremely interesting to try and make an investment in some rocket fuels, to be honest. Next up, we've got self-harmonizing power cores. So this is again last week's massive buyout, causing the price to jump up to 225. And you can see here for the self-harmonizing power cores that there is a bit more momentum to recover towards 2 million. Not happening just yet. Sellers are at 2,150,000 ISK and the buyers are at 2 million, though they are trying to drag that price down to go towards less than 2 million for a nice investment in self-harmonizing power cores, and the new supply cannot dictate the price effectively enough. As a result, we have some nice correction in the works, I think, for self-harmonizing power cores. How many buyers above 2 million? Just 3 of them. So there is some potential, I think, with more fresh supply coming in, that we'll see a real opportunity of buying well below 2 million for self-harmonizing power cores. This is a little bit of crystal ball looking, of course. We're never sure exactly what the market is going to do, and last time 2 million clearly triggered investors already, so it could be tough to actually find a buy opportunity well below that, but I'm still holding on for that hope, especially looking at the downwards momentum here and the buyers basically not budging. They're saying nope, 2 million, that's it, we're not going that much higher. Superconductors next, up in price on a bit of a volume increase and already going back down a little bit in the last few days. 13,400 for the sellers, 12,000 for the buyers. Definitely still above average for the sellers, not so much for the buyers, and still a slight sell opportunity for superconductors. Next up here we've got test cultures, which is an investment of mine, and that is depressingly flat for a PI chart, it must be said, since basically March, where it went down towards 7,500 to 8,000 ISK. It's basically not budged from there. At the tail end we can see some more downwards pressure even. So 8,000 for the sellers, 7,700 for the buyers. I still think that there is potential for this to go up if you look at the rest of the chart here, but this is very unusual to see such a flat one. Still keep in mind here again at the tail end we are going down on the 20-day moving average. We're heading towards, well, that 1-year low, not yet, but if we break below 7,500 ISK on the buyers, I do think that the market may trigger and there may be some volatility that we could take advantage of. And finally we have the wetware mainframes. Again, advanced PI materials used in the construction of structures. Last week we had this investment round happening, went up in price towards 2.4 million. Is recovering, but not as well as the self-harmonizing power cores, and I think that that's normal. Wetware mainframes have always been the major bottleneck in structure production, so I think it's normal that it has less momentum, and it does 2.3 million for the sellers and 2.2 million for the buyers. That is the biggest difference, of course, is that for wetware mainframes there is this very strong demand. Buyers are not all that patient and they're pushing up to 2.2 million. It's the same with the integrity response drones. They went up from less than 2.5 million to 2.6 million, thus slowing down this decrease in price. And in the self-harmonizing power cost, it's just not happening. Those buyers are not budging. They're saying 2 million, that's it, market, keep dumping your stuff, we'll pick up the cheap ones. And as a result, I think self-harmonizing power cores may be the one where you will have the easiest time picking up some investments. Wetware mainframes though, yeah, we'll need some time to recuperate from that. And it's only 1 out of 3 that we're checking here that that has this strong-willed demand that is saying no, we're not going up in price. We know that you guys are overproducing. As a result, it makes it difficult to gauge exactly where all of this is going, because there is of course this strong demand at 2 million ISK or 2.5 million for integrity response drones, for both people preparing and people investing for the launch of the next set of structures, and as a result trying to pick it up at the best possible price is very tricky, and you need to pay a very close attention to the market if you want to do so. So personally, of course, because I am going for a large structure after the expansion, I think I will try to pick some up like just above those cheap prices. But if I'm looking for investments, then I'm holding on for better prices and keeping a close eye on the self-harmonizing power cores. Let's move on to Tech One chips next. 2945. There we go. So here I've been a bit lazy on this. I still haven't switched it up for some new Tech One chips. We'll see at some point, maybe I'll do it, but at the moment, except for the Abaddon that managed to go up to 200 million ISK, that is going down here at the tail end, probably on fresh supply. Well, not even that much, but does go down to 191.5 million. This on, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sell orders basically. So there is this wider margin because of this increase in price, but that gap is being filled very quickly. One thing to keep in mind though, it's being filled by orders of 1 to 2 Abaddons, and this can be bought out very quickly if the demand is real. But of course, we are talking a ship that on average is being sold maybe 15 times a day. So very slow, tiny market, but a first Tech One ship that actually has been selling a little bit above or towards the pre-ascension prices. The Caracal next, after going down last week back to 9.6 million, went back up a little bit to 10 million and now is currently on its way back down again, just below 10 million for the sellers, 9.2 million for the buyers. This I think is just some market forces where an increase in price to above 10 million brings in some fresh supply. We go back down in price a little bit, sellers hold off, and as a result we go back up towards 10 million, some more caracals come back in. So this is basically normal market forces. I'm not seeing it in the volumes that this would be buyouts at 9.8 million or anything like that. This is just, yeah, I'm seeing 10 million, all right, and bring some caracals to the market. Whoop. People see that the price going back down. As a result, they're not bringing more caracals at 9.6 million, so the price goes back up a little bit. This is just normal market force. It's quite unfortunate that we need something like one of the more popular cruisers in PvP to actually see that happening in the Tech One market, because here is the Governor, much flatter at the moment and selling for just above 25 million, 26.5 for the sellers, 23.6 for the buyers, and here the average price is at, let's take a quick look at that, 25.5. This is quite interesting in the sense that it's not the sellers that are dictating the price. It's a bit of both, right? It's between 23.5 and 26.5. So you have some people that are buying these for 26.5, but you also have some sellers that are just saying, you know what, I'm not gonna bother for the 3 million, I'm just gonna sell straight to a buyer as well. And so you get these average prices between the two, and a slowed down market that is at the moment looking pretty stable from that perspective. Quite unfortunate, of course, that we're maybe selling 30 Governors a day at the moment. Ferox next. Here again, I think we can ascribe this, well, maybe a little bit. From time to time you do get some volume spikes with increased prices, so maybe some buyouts happen in the Ferox market, but in general this is hovering between, let's take it broadly, 45 to 55 million. Yeah, that's actually a decently wide spread, so I do think that there is some buyouts happening here. Currently selling for 48.7 million, buyers are at that floor of 45 million, of course. And when there are enough Feroxes to the market, some bigger parties come in and buy big fleets of them. I think that's the difference between the Ferox chart, because it goes from 45 to 55 million, and here the Caracal is basically going from maybe 9.5 to 10.5 million. So not even that, just above 10 million. And so here for the Ferox, it could definitely be some buyouts. Hurricane next went up in price a little bit last week as well, but is already being plugged by fresh supply. That is selling for 47.3 million. Buyers are at 44 million for the Hurricane. And what can we see? Well, we went up to 50 million, maybe 49.5, 48. 48 million again, then we go to 47.6, 47.3. So it's taking steps downwards at the moment on the newer supply that's coming in, and it's gonna put some pressure on the price, of course. Maelstrom next, decently flat at the current price range, around 160 million, 171 for the buyers, 154 for the sellers. Again, an indication that basically, if it's really 160, it could be, let's see here, no, it's 160 to 170, it's pretty close to 170. Otherwise, it would have been a lot of dumping happening straight to buyers, which I don't think is happening all that much. So let's say that it's above 165 in all likeliness on the average price. So some people are still selling straight to these buyers, which means that if you want a cheap Maelstrom, you can definitely pick it up for like 155, 156. But yeah, 171, 172 for the sellers, definitely not a great price either. Megatron next, after that little bump up to 180 million, which was not bad. We're basically back to normal average prices for the moment, right? For the better mining yields, for the lower mineral prices, for the low demand, because I mean this is like 20-25 a day, not that much either. Selling for 165 million ISK for the Megatron. Buyers are at 146 million ISK. The bad news is a couple of dumps here, 1030 as the latest two sell orders. That is going to keep the price, of course, from going much higher than it is at the moment. Looking for a flat chart here. Prophecy next, that has a little bit of volatility at the tail end. Quite strange chart. Let's go like this. Should be a bit more visible. But the volumes though are quite abysmal, 14-15 a day. That's pretty bad. And so as a result here, an increase in price can happen on maybe something like 30 ships. No, 77 ships. All right, that's a bit more here. 60 ships, yeah, more than 50 ships. But that can increase the price to like 55 and even 60 million. But couple days later, people have dumped them back down to 51 million on the sellers and 47 million on the buyers. So prophecy, apparently there was some buying happening in that. 50-60 is what we're talking about, not all that much, but causing massive increases in price. But of course 30-40 prophecy is coming back to the market, crashes the price right back down to this around 50 million average price. So not that great, not as great as what it looked like. It looked like for a moment that some of these Mars ships would be going back to pre-ascension prices, but it's getting plucked quite quickly. So I still think that the theory may hold true, that this is some preparation buying from CVA for a possible war over the outposts, which will of course be turned into faction citadels. Scorpion next, Kaldari battleship that also went up to 160 million. So that's actually a pretty depressing thing to have to say. Went up to 160 million for a battleship. That's actually still pretty damn cheap, and is currently pushed back down to 140. 146 million for the sellers, 137 for the buyers. Very, very cheap Scorpions at the moment. And finally, we have the Vexor that is really flat. This is again the normal market forces variations. Difference with the Caracal, the Vexor basically hovers a little bit above 10 million ISK and then goes up to maybe 10 point, what would that be? 10.4, and then goes back down to 10 million. So that's what's happening here. 10.2 for the Vexor, just a little bit below 10 million for the buyers of Vexors. So yeah, the Tech 1 market is basically very depressing when you look at the volumes. It's just not there. People are flying faction ships, Tech 2s, Tech 3s, but the Tech 1 ships are basically left by the wayside at the moment. Combine that with the really cheap minerals at the moment and the changes to mining, and you've got a very depressed market that only the more popular ships still have decent volumes and still see some market fluctuations, and a lot of the other ones like the Scorpion, I mean this is like 10 a day, 5 here on a day. This is really bad, and that means that there's just very little business to do. You'll have these reactions if all of a sudden there is some interest in these ships. You'll see very fast and very nice increases in price, but 20-30 of them being brought back to the market is going to crash these prices right back down to their bottom, and so it's not a good time to be a Tech 1 ship manufacturer. Next up, the Tech 2 market at 39 minutes. Yeah. just above that, but that's okay. Let's take a look at the Aries here. Basically, after a nice sell opportunity towards 30 million, we're normalizing at 22.5 million. A little bit of an uptrend in the last few days, so that's not too great for the buyers. 21.6 million, sellers at 23 million. That is not where we want to be to either buy or sell. So the Aries, I think last week we had a slight buy opportunity, but this week we are a bit above that. So that's a no. Here's the claw, similar situation, right? Last week we probably had a nice investment opportunity when the chart was flat at this price range. Currently buyers are still at 20 million. You can still gamble it, but I think, or these, yeah, all of these are new. So if you look here, last week we could try to pick some up just below 20 million ISK. Now we have to go above 20 million ISK to pick up a claw. Still okay, we're definitely at the lower end of the chart, but I wouldn't go crazy on the volumes here. Next up, the crow is trying to go back down a little bit, but we need to see the chart towards this price range here, below 23 million at least. The buyers are at 22.1 million. It's all right, but still not great. What makes it interesting though is here 119, 100. So big sell orders are going to keep putting pressure on the market. So keep an eye on the crow, right? If no interest comes out of this. If this basically does keep putting pressure on the price and we've got sellers going below those prices, then the buyers may start to fall off to even lower prices, although it's quite a lot to ask to go towards 20.5 million here. That's basically a lot of investors that need to have their orders filled, but the volumes are there, so maybe keep an eye on the crow, it could be interesting. Next up, we've got the Aries flat in between, so I don't think that that's too interesting. 50 million for the sellers, 44.5 for the buyers. 44.5, no, I don't think I would buy that just yet. Here's the flycatcher, went up in price a little bit to 80 million almost, and currently already back down to 67 million. Buyers are at 65 million, so that has basically been a little bit of a buyout. And then just look at the big jumps here, 79, 78, 69, 67, 66 million. So that's the big competition, 127 being dumped here. Could put some pressure on the price, but at the moment, of course, I don't think we'd be buying these. Heretic next on a high note. I think you can definitely try to sell Heretics above 60 million. Yep, that's not so bad. Buyers are up to 56 as well. So this is okay to sell. The Heretic at the moment I think is in a nice place for some selling. We'd need massive volumes to bring this back down. And of course, if we could buy them below 50 million, that would be great, but that's not happening this week. So yeah, it's an in-between week. It seems here is the Hound as well. Normalizing here, but we'd like to see the chart back at 20 million. Buyers are still above 20 million, sellers are at 22.3 million. So that's again a no on the Hound. Malediction going down, although I don't like the Malediction myself because it's pretty obvious that it is being manipulated by these consistent data points here. Selling for 23 million, buyers are 20.777 million. So that is obviously, there's like a couple of players here in the Malediction market. It's going to be very tough to compete with those guys. So I unfortunately wouldn't go for the Malediction. The Manticore, so here early June we had a nice buy opportunity, but currently settling at 25 million, 25.6 for the sellers, 23.5 for the buyers. Again, that's not where we want to be for investing. And the Nemesis unfortunately shooting up in price as well. Buyers at 20 million. You could still try to pick up some Nemesis at 20 million. I think that's okay. If prices do go up, you get sell opportunities 25, 26 million, definitely possible. So I think it's okay, but the chart doesn't show that it's gonna be the right time to do so, I think, because basically there is decently high demand at the moment. Purifier next, also a little bit of a jump up, and we don't really like where that one is going. 25 million. Maybe you could try to sell a couple if you have those, but 22.3 million for the buyers. That's a nope for investing again. And finally the Saber also stabilizing just below 55 million. Not great, 54 for the sellers. Less than 50 for the buyers though. We'll take a look at that on the chart. Could be interesting, we've had better, but yeah, maybe you could try to still pick up some cheap Sabers. But people have been making their moves and are competing at 49.9 million already. So you'll need to pay a little bit of a premium on that, but you can still pick up Sabers below 50 million, almost the only one. Saber and then the the Claw, I would say, at 20 million. Maybe Nemesis at 20 million. Couple of slight buy opportunities, but it's not the greatest time. If there's anything, if you have any patience, I would look at the Crow. Keep an eye on that one in the next 2 days, because this massive supply here should have an interesting impact on the chart and maybe bring forth a buy opportunity. But for the Tech 2 market this week, not great. Everything is a little bit in between where we'd like to see it for either selling or buying, and so that's a big no, unfortunately. Moving on to the Tech 3 market, 44.50. Yes, let's start as always with the destroyers. Take a look at that here. Confessor on its way back down already, 34 million. And 102.85 here being sold at 35 million. Buyers 31.5, a little bit of a margin forming here, but there are still a couple hundred confessors to go through, and it's going to be interesting to see next week if we see more dumping or if actually this is it for the confessor market. A lot of people might have those to actually fly them, and then we could see if this is a start of market forces showing back in the tactical destroyer market. It could be interesting to try and still pick a couple of up at 31.5 million. But if it's not, if we get hundreds of them in the pipeline that are being brought to the market, then it's obviously not the right time to do so. Hecate next, very similar chart of course, at the tail end a little bit under pressure, but 35 million for the sellers, 31.5 for the buyers, very similar charts here. And the bad news is 345, another 60, another 50 or so here being sold for 38 million. So it's still hundreds of them that you can see that are sometimes dumped in one order, and that to me indicates that there's probably hundreds more waiting. Next up here we got the Jackdaw. That one is looking pretty good though. Whoa, went up to 52.4 million. Buyers are at 45 million. If you bought some Jackdaws at these cheap prices here, which is 30 million, definitely a great opportunity to sell. That is quite incredible. Look at the Jackdaw here. Volumes wise, yeah, we can spot here that all of a sudden 500 of them have been bought, causing the price to increase a second time up to 50 million. Not bad, guys. Jackdaws, try to sell them if you made that investment. I think I'm not sure if I still have a couple lying around or not. And then finally we've got this Vapel as well. Very similar chart to Confessor and the Hecate, also going down at the tail end here. Currently selling for 35 million. Buyers are at 32.7 million, and again seller 562 is going to keep the Svapel prices from shooting up. So the Confessor actually might be the one. Well, it's still 200. It's gonna take a little bit of time, so we'll need to see if there's more coming, if those sellers have more munitions to try and sell these Confessors or not. Depending on that, these buyers at 31.5 could be interesting, but I'd be pretty careful. Next up, the cruisers, of course. Here is the Legion, after going up in price to 200 million, going back down in price already, selling for 145 million, buyers 133 million. So this has definitely been a little bit of maybe a panic reaction, or the sudden interest in the new Tech 3 cruisers that have caused the price to increase massively all of a sudden. But it's gonna be pretty short-lived from the looks of it, and we're already normalizing 245 for the Legion. What's the Loki doing? Also going up in price, went up to 230 million ISK, currently selling for 159 million, still a decent price, but pretty obvious that the sell opportunity is over. 137 for the buyers. Next up we've got the Proteus, again very similar chart, already back down to 130 apparently. Yeah, oof, ouch, 122.5 for the sellers, 113 million for the buyers. It's good that I had two Protei, because if I would have bought them for like 160, 170, I would feel pretty bad right now. And then finally we've got the Tengu. Let's start with the chart as well. Very similar, of course, went up to like 160 million, currently sold for 129 million, and the buyers are at 116. So it looks like it's gonna be a short spurt up for the Tech 3 cruisers, and we'll be back in oversupply territory in no time, I fear, because just look at the massive amount of dumping that's happening. All that competition from 135 down to 129 million. For the Prots is probably even worse. That went down from 145, then 143, 200 of them being sold. And then just look at that, 138, 130, 124, 122.5. That's where they're competing at the moment, and there's still 30 of them coming in here already. So yeah, it's just the name of the game, unfortunately. Especially if you follow Reddit a little bit, you know that there is this Excel Citadel, I think, that's going to be destroyed by, I want to say HK, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it is basically the alliance that is, after this, will be controlling all C6 wormholes in New Eden, and that is basically an extremely steady and stable supply chain for Tech Tree stuff, and that means that we'll have overproduction. It's just almost inevitable. There needs to be this change up in wormhole space to see more volatility, so I do fear that there are indeed hundreds of ships waiting in these destroyer markets as well. And as a result, yeah, this is just going to probably be oversupplied, and it's going to be one of the consequences of the new structures that will have completely stabilized the wormhole space systems, because now you can basically make yourself virtually unevictable. As long as you're active there, it's going to be very tough to do, and as a result, it's become so much more stable. And yeah, that's bad news for Tech Tree prices. Of course, those will be under pressure pretty soon. That's my personal expectation. Next up, we have the extra product at 51 minutes. And I'm choosing the pirate cruisers this week, because last week we did frigates. I think we checked the battleships as well, where production volumes have increased by 50%, causing the price to increase quite substantially. We might check those back next week or something like that to take a look at how that's been faring. But for this week, pirate faction cruisers, let's take a look at that. Here is the Ashmu. After a nice little peak, is going back down already to 90 million. So I think that this could be like, well, not for the Ashimu, I don't think, but it's the Alliance Tournament that we should keep in mind here. So there may be some interest and some buying happening because of that. The Ashimu is going back down in price, 93 million for the sellers, 85, 86 for the buyers here. 93, probably on average, basically the Ashimu. Here's the Cinnaball next. Here again, yeah, you see this shot up in price, a little bit of buying happening. Currently going for just less than 150 million, I think. 149 for the sellers, 137 for the buyers. What is this price? Maybe a touch above average, although these median daily prices here seem to indicate that we're going right back on the average for the pirate faction cruisers. Interesting. Orthrus, after a pretty strong period at 230 million, coming back down here. Interesting. Currently selling for 218 million, bars are at 200, and 200 is probably the average. So again, also normalizing towards the average, although the Orthrus was in a pretty strong place just a couple of months ago. Next up, we've got the Phantasm here. That's a pretty bad chart, but a little spike up to 160, going back down to 110, currently selling for 117, bars are at 104. Right on average, I would say, for the Phantasm. Interesting. We've not often seen a similar pattern in most of these, but here's Stradios, went up to 220, is going back down to less than 200 million. 201 for the sellers, 188 for the buyers. Probably okay to call that average prices again, or at least heading there, just like the Orthrus. Next up, the Gila, one of my favorites for exploration. That one's actually a little bit at a high point, although still quite doable compared to last year. Up to 220 million, so 217 for the sellers, 205, 206 for the buyers. For the Gila, a little bit of a premium, but still an okay price on the full 1 year chart. And finally, we have the Vigilant, the one that's actually on a higher note here, up to 210 million ISK. Yeah, 220 for the sellers, 200 million for the buyers. The Vigilant a little bit above average. So interesting. I would say, I think there is some tie-in between faction cruisers and faction frigates as well, between exploration and them. And so from that perspective, I would say it is looking like there is still a decent amount of exploration being done. These BPCs are still being found and produced, and we have average prices across the board for cruisers except for the Vigilant. So maybe I should get back to Galente Space and do some Serpentis sites. Because apparently those are not being run all that often. This could be a barometer for that. Maybe I should test that out actually. We have to do the agency anyway, and I may just, maybe, we'll see what I decide to do. I need to do a fuel run as well on the structures. That's going to keep me in a Mars space, but if we're looking at this as a barometer for activity in exploration, and I think that's definitely not you know, not such a crazy idea to do, and it's actually looking like Galente space is lacking activity, which could mean that there is a lot of opportunity there with a bit less competition, and stuff like the Gila, well, that's the rest is basically close to the average, with the Phantasm dropping down quite low. So maybe there's actually a lot of exploration happening in a Mars space. So yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I'll need to keep a closer eye on that and see if there is actually a correlation. So maybe in the next couple of weeks I'll go take a look at Galente space for some exploration in my good old Ishtar, see if I can spot some Vigilant drops or something like that, bring that market back down a little bit. That would be great, of course. If I can still sell them for 200 million, that would be the basically best pirate faction cruiser that you can find at the moment. Alright, interesting, something to keep in mind. Maybe there is something there. Hopefully I'll find the time to actually test that out. For now, that's it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.